So far in 2025, it feels like we were right once again about the quarterback position. The better value that you can find later on, the better overall fantasy team you can put together. Drafting a quarterback early does not work out nearly as well as what some people think. And maybe you did use a super early pick on a guy like Josh Allen. It's probably not biting you in the butt too much right now, but I would love to see the fantasy teams for people who drafted Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford, Sam Darnold. Maybe you even picked up Daniel Jones super late in your draft or off the waiver wire. And what about Dak Prescott? He's currently the QB3, and he was drafted outside the top 12 quarterbacks. Those are the teams that are probably kicking butt in their leagues right now. And if you didn't already love Thursday Night Football enough, this week it's going to smell of Bengay and icy hot with Aaron Rodgers and Joe Flacco facing off against each other. They'll probably show up for the game after they're done at Denny's getting their senior Grand Slam special. Aaron Rodgers is going to be a fringe start for me this week. I think he has top 12 potential, but he's been a much more solid QB2 this season than he has been a quarterback 1. And typically, if I think a guy is going to fall anywhere just outside the top 12, he's more of a fringe start. Now, if this is a 2 QB league or a super flex league, clearly he's an actual start, but in a 1 QB league, you might have some options with a little bit more upside. Pittsburgh is currently allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and Joe Flacco looked solid last week, 29 of 45, threw for 219 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. And he clearly has the wide receivers to make things happen in this offense. I think he's a fringe start as well, a guy that's QB2, just on the outside looking in. Over in London, Matthew Stafford could end up having a huge game against this Jacksonville Jags defense. The last 3 quarterbacks to face Jacksonville have all thrown for 295 or more passing yards, and Matthew Stafford is heating up. He's been the QB2 and the QB8 2 weeks prior to this last weather game where things were a little bit all over the place. Yeah, he might be missing Puka Nacua. He still has plenty of options to be a top 10 quarterback though. Personally, I'm sitting Trevor Lawrence over in London. He's had some good performances this season, but they're not the type of performances that you see replicated over and over again. Trevor Lawrence is going up against a defense currently allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points per game. And these games over in London tend to be a little bit more sloppy than what we would like. Yeah, he's been the QB5 and the QB11 his last couple of games, but I don't think all of those points are something that he's going to continuously produce. Somehow, some way, Spencer Rattler was able to find himself as a QB2 once again last week. The guy has virtually no ceiling right now, but one of the better floors of all quarterbacks. This guy has been super consistent all season with where he's been finishing. This week, going up against the Chicago Bears, they currently allow the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, mostly because they've allowed 13 passing touchdowns, tied for 3rd most in the league. Rattler's going to find himself as a QB2 once again. Caleb Williams has himself a solid matchup as well. The New Orleans Saints, well, they've allowed 14 passing touchdowns, 2nd most in the league. Last week, Caleb Williams was solid on Monday Night Football. A decent amount of passing yards, but only 1 passing touchdown. What I would really like to see from Caleb Williams this week is 225 or more passing yards and at least 2 touchdowns with no interceptions. I'm going to go ahead and sit Tua going up against this Cleveland defense this week. Right now, the Browns are allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. They only have created 2 interceptions, however. If they could start creating more turnovers in the secondary, they'll see those fantasy points drop even more at this point. Now, Tua has 3 interceptions last week. 3 of them, which unfortunately makes 7 for the season now with Tua. He's turning the ball over too much, and in a tougher matchup, I would really hate to see him turning the ball over once again, especially in my lineup. Dillon Gabriel has a much better matchup against this Miami team, however. Currently, they're allowing the 2nd most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and they've allowed 15 total touchdowns as well. Now, Dillon Gabriel has not thrown an interception as of yet, which maybe in 2 games doesn't sound super impressive, but considering he threw the ball 52 times last week, That is good for him to have not turned over the ball yet. I don't think he's going to be throwing the ball 52 times a game anymore. Quinshon Judkins is going to be the main guy in this game going up against Miami. Dylan Gabriel has a solid floor, but not a top 12 ceiling. Drake May has a tougher matchup this week, going up against Tennessee, who have only allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points per game. You might see his ceiling come down a little bit from where it has been. I'm still going to start him, however. He's been a top 8 quarterback in 4 or 5 games this season. He was the QB2 overall last week, and he does lose a little bit of upside, as I mentioned, but I don't care. He's only thrown 2 interceptions this season. The ceiling continues to be high, and the floor is even better. This is a solid matchup for Cam Ward this week, but Cam Ward hasn't played all that well so far this season. From a fantasy perspective, he only has 2 finishes inside the top 24 quarterbacks. So realistically, even though New England is giving up the 9th most passing yards to opposing quarterbacks, and he's going to have a new acting head coach, Cam Ward, to me, has a little too much going against him for this matchup. Geno Smith better count himself as being extremely lucky right now. Not only is he making a ton of money for a quarterback that's playing like absolute crap, but it's the money that he's making that is keeping Las Vegas from just benching him. That's why he keeps getting ran out there. Even though another interception last week now gives him 10 total for the season. Geno, if you don't pick it up, my man, you're going to find yourself out of a job and on the golf course pretty soon. And if you need help cleaning up those golf clubs before you head out for your first round, then our friends over at Caddy Splash are exactly who you want to talk to. And Geno, give me a call, send me an email, we'll hook you up. Code HEADLINERS at checkout is going to get you 15% off of your entire order over at caddysplash.com, or use the link down in our description below. Geno, if you play golf the way you throw a football, then your golf clubs are going to need to look spectacular because everyone's going to be laughing at your game and your clubs if you don't keep them clean. And Caddy Splash has all the tools to make you look like a professional golfer, even if your game doesn't. But I'm going to sit Geno Smith this week. There's no way that I'm playing this guy anymore this season until we see a streak of games where he stops turning the ball over. Patrick Mahomes is on a heater right now, and even though Las Vegas has allowed the 9th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes is still in line for another solid day. He's been a top 6 quarterback in every game but 1 this season. Jalen Hurts is playing extremely well right now, but this is going to be an extremely tough matchup going up against Minnesota. Right now, Minnesota is allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and they have not allowed 200 passing yards in a game to a quarterback yet this season either. And Hurts does have 280 or more passing yards in back-to-back games. But that's not how he's going to make his floor this week against this defense. He's going to need to run the football. How many rushing yards plus how many rushing touchdowns will determine just how high his floor goes. Regardless of who starts at quarterback this week, I'm going to sit both of them. Now, JJ is back at practice, and there is still a possibility that he does return very soon, except I expect it to be Carson Wentz this week, so I'm not nearly as worried about JJ McCarthy as of yet. Philadelphia has only allowed 7 passing touchdowns so far this season. Carson Wentz may not throw for many touchdowns this week, but he could throw for a decent amount of yards. It could be just enough yards to get him inside the top 24 quarterbacks, but not nearly enough for me to be excited about it. The New York Jets have allowed the 8th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks so far this season, and last week Bryce Young looked good in a very solid matchup. Will he look good again, though? Because over the last 2 weeks, he's faced Dallas, who have allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks, and he's also faced Miami, who has allowed the 2nd most fantasy points per quarterback. But Bryce Young has only been able to finish as the QB 24 and the QB 10, showing that he has very limited upside, even in really strong matchups. Now, the New York Jets did give Bo Nix some fits last week. That may have just been London, though. So at this point with Bryce Young, fringe start. Again, he's had some really good matchups, and he hasn't really had that great of a ceiling. Since Justin Fields returned from his concussion, he's had 2 top 10 performances, and he's looked solid in those games. Last week, he ran into a buzzsaw. Whether it was over in London, whether it was the Denver defense, whatever it was not good. But this week against Carolina could be much better. He's going to be a fringe start because while he still does have a decent ceiling every single week, his floor is, I think, what carries him this week, and it's how many rushing yards he picks up. I think he bounces back, but probably only top 14. And like we just mentioned with that Denver defense, Jackson Dart gets to face him again this week. And it's good to be excited about Jackson Dart. I am too. I had him as my QB2 this draft season. I absolutely loved him. So when he goes out and performs the way he does, I get super excited about it as well. But I got to put my love aside for him for just a second and realize Denver's defense is really good. They allowed the second fewest fantasy points per game, and they've only allowed 4 passing touchdowns all season long. Since he took over as the starter, he's been the QB7 so far this season. But reaching that height this week, I think is totally out of the question. And maybe he shocks everybody and Jackson Dart proves that he's him. And if he does that, I will take the L on this gladly. But I also am going to be very cautious about it as well. I don't want to start Dart this week unless I absolutely have to. Bo Nix has not had a ton of upside this season. He only has 2 performances out of 6 games inside the top 12. Realistically, he needs to start throwing for multiple touchdowns more often. And this week going up against the New York Giants, he has an opportunity to do that. We need to see that ceiling a little bit more often going forward. And if we do, he goes from being a fringe start to a must start every week. For those of you riding the Daniel Jones train right now, it may have to slow down this week going up against the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers currently allow the 7th fewest fantasy points per game, mainly due to the fact that they have 6 interceptions and they've only allowed 5 passing touchdowns so far. Daniel Jones is going to need to pick up some yards on the ground this week, and if he could add a rushing touchdown, that would be fabulous as well. He's a fringe start for me, though, because of the turnover potential. I've got Justin Herbert listed as a start this week, but I do think there are other quarterbacks that likely have a little bit more upside than what he does. He might be missing Quentin Johnston. As of this recording, still no word on whether or not he's going to be able to play. He's got multiple injuries at the running back position. He's got multiple injuries on the offensive line. He's playing pretty well for the disaster that is around him right now. Indianapolis is allowing the 10th most passing yards on the season. Now, they do have 7 interceptions, but they've allowed 10 passing touchdowns as well. Herbert has not been a top 12 quarterback over his last 3 games. Last week's floor as QB 13 was solid though. 2 touchdown passes, no interceptions. And I think he could be about the same this week. Jaden Daniels versus Dak Prescott may be one of the most fun games to watch all weekend long. It's going to have a ton of points potentially. Jaden Daniels may be the quarterback 1 this week, going up against a Dallas defense, allowing the most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Here's the kicker though. Jaden Daniels needs to hold on to the football. 2 fumbles and an interception last week. We can't do that in this matchup. Dak's got another solid matchup as well. This Washington defense allows the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks and the 8th most passing yards. Over the last 3 games, he's been a top 6 performer. 10 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. Believe it or not, Arizona's defense is actually allowing the 10th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and Jordan Love has been a QB2 all season long. He's like a little bit of a better looking version of Spencer Rattler. He's got a little bit more upside. I think he can be closer to a top 12 quarterback than what Spencer Rattler is, but he's had a solid floor like Rattler all season long. He only has 1 QB1 performance, but every other game has been inside the top 24. So if you're playing him, you're not hating him. As of now for Arizona, there does not appear to be a controversy at the quarterback position. Jonathan Gannon made it known when Kyler Murray is healthy, he will be the quarterback. But we don't know how healthy he is right now. And this matchup going up against Green Bay, regardless if Kyler Murray plays or not, he may not be 100%. So I don't want to play him this week unless I absolutely have to. And if for some reason he's out, I don't think Jacoby Brissett is going to be the streaming option. We've seen some high highs and some low lows from Michael Penix, and I think he's somewhere in between those. Like what we saw last week. He's going to throw the ball well. Him and Drake London have a good connection together, but it's going to be the run game that propels this offense. We've seen Michael Penix with a couple of games over 19 fantasy points. We've seen a couple of single-digit performances as well. But right around 15 fantasy points is where I think Michael Penix is going to live a majority of the time. And going up against San Francisco this week, will it be a tougher matchup than the Bills? Probably not, but I think the key to winning for Atlanta is the same. It goes with Bijan Robinson, Drake London, mix in Tyler Algier, and have Michael Penix be the type of quarterback that doesn't need to go out and win every single game. As of this recording, it sounds like Brock Brock Purdy is making progress in practice, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be out there against the Atlanta Falcons on Sunday night. Personally, for me, I would rather give Brock Purdy another week to heal up instead of sending him out against this defense. I'll let Mac Jones take one for the team. If Mac Jones does start, he's going to be a sit. If Brock Purdy does start, he's also going to be a sit. Right now, Atlanta is allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Last week, Mac Jones threw for almost 350 yards. But 2 interceptions and 0 touchdowns. For Tampa Bay and Detroit on Monday Night Football, it's about which beat-up team is going to end up outperforming the other. What backups will be better? The backup wide receivers for Tampa Bay or the backup secondary for the Lions? Now, it doesn't matter who Baker Mayfield has to throw the ball to. He's going to throw the football, and he's probably going to do it well. Detroit is allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, and I already mentioned it. They're banged up or suspended in the secondary. So regardless of who Baker Mayfield has to throw the ball to, he's going to pick up some yards. He's going to score some points, and he's still going to be a solid option this week. Tampa Bay's defense also gives up quite a bit of fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks as well. They give up the 10th most. The biggest difference is Baker Mayfield doesn't have all of his weapons. Jared Goff does, and he's been solid all season long. And even against Kansas City, limited mistakes show that he has a solid floor. And at home in this matchup, they're probably pretty angry about last week at Kansas City. I could see Goff having a great day. CJ Stroud before the bye was the quarterback one going up against Baltimore. That matchup probably will not happen going up against Seattle, but it was good to see him finally show some upside. It's been a while. In this matchup, I still think he's a fringe start, but I think he's more on the just outside portion of the top 12 looking in. Houston's defense is currently allowing the fewest fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, but they're going to be getting one of the hottest quarterbacks in all of football. Can't believe I'm getting ready to say this, Sam Darnold. Over the last couple of weeks, he is the quarterback 3. He has 28.6 and 20 fantasy points over the last 2 weeks. He's only going to be a fringe start here, though, because it is a very tough matchup, but luckily it's at home, so he still has a decent floor for me. Headliner Nation, that's going to do it for all of my start and sit videos this week. Hopefully you found them all super entertaining, but mostly informative, and you've been starting to make some fantasy decisions for your lineup this week that you'll start locking in with the rest of our shows and our live shows. Make sure you tune into everything the rest of the week, subscribe if you're new here, turn on the bell notification, hit that like button, but more importantly, stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.